The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor as Mrs. Henderson's voice rose through the thin apartment wall. "Your damn sprinklers are flooding my begonias again, Jerry." I grabbed a dish towel, kneeling among the ceramic shards. 65 years old, and still cleaning up messes that weren't entirely my fault. The phone rang. I ignored it, focused on soaking up the spreading coffee puddle. The ringing persisted, cutting through Eleanor's continued shouting from next door. On the fifth ring, I stood up. Jerry Flores speaking. "Mr. Flores, this is Janet Morrison from Morrison, Welsh and Associates in Cheyenne." The woman's voice carried that professional tone I recognized, the kind that preceded bad news. "I'm calling regarding Brianna Elizabeth Flores." My hand tightened around the receiver. Nobody had called Brianna by her full name in my presence for 15 years. "Sir, I'm very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Flores passed away on Tuesday evening. The funeral service is scheduled for this Friday at 2 o'clock. The words hit like a physical blow. I sank into the kitchen chair. Tuesday evening. That was 3 days ago. "Mr. Flores, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. How did you get my number?" "Your name was listed in Mrs. Flores's personal effects as an emergency contact. I understand you were previously married." "Yes. We divorced in 2010. "I see. Well, there will be a reading of the will following the service. You're named as a beneficiary, so your presence would be appreciated." Beneficiary? The word felt foreign, impossible. Brianna had built her empire after our divorce. What could she possibly have left me? "Mr. Flores, will you be attending?" "The chapel," I said slowly. "Riverside Memorial on Grand Avenue. The service begins at 2. The will reading is scheduled for 4:30 in our offices downtown." I found myself nodding. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I remained in the chair, unable to process the simple fact that Brianna, vibrant, stubborn, impossible Brianna, was gone. As I sat there, the name Brianna Elizabeth Flores echoed in my mind. It pulled me back to Murphy's Diner on a snowy February evening in 1987, watching a woman in a red wool coat argue with the manager about his hiring practices. "You're telling me you won't consider female applicants for weekend manager because women can't handle the pressure?" She was magnificent in her anger. The business card lay abandoned on the counter. Brianna Chun, business consultant. I memorized the phone number before stepping into the February wind. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to call. "Have dinner with me somewhere better than Murphy's." She laughed. "Saturday night, Romano's on 3rd Street, 7 o'clock. 6 months later, I proposed in that same diner. "Marry me, Brianna Chun. Make me the luckiest man in Wyoming." She said yes. "Forever," she whispered, and I believed her completely. Dustin arrived 2 years later. I remember standing in the hospital room, watching Brianna cradle our son with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. But even then, I noticed how Brianna's eyes occasionally drifted to the business magazine. As Dustin grew, I began to notice things I'd missed. When he turned 7, Brianna bought him a computer. "He needs to understand technology," she explained. "The future belongs to kids who think digitally." I'd suggested teaching him to fish instead. She'd laughed, but not kindly. Brianna's consulting firm had landed a contract with a mining consortium. Suddenly, we had money for things I'd never imagined. "Isn't this wonderful?" Brianna asked one evening, gesturing at our new dining room with its crystal chandelier. "We can finally entertain properly." I missed our old kitchen table, scarred from years of Dustin's coloring projects. The entertaining started almost immediately. "Jerry works at the power plant," Brianna would explain when someone asked. I heard something new in her voice, an apologetic edge, as if my job required an excuse. Dustin thrived in this new world. At 14, he rolled his eyes when I suggested family camping trips. "Dad doesn't understand," became his favorite phrase. The first real fight came on Dustin's 15th birthday. Brianna had planned a party that looked more like a corporate networking event. "This is embarrassing," I told her. "He's 15, not 50. Being just a kid is a luxury we can't afford to give him," she said. "The world is competitive." Either we prepare him to win, or we prepare him to lose. I caught Dustin once standing alone by the pool, looking lost among all the sophisticated celebration. "You okay, buddy?" He straightened quickly. Of course, why wouldn't I be? But I'd seen the confused little boy underneath. What followed were 10 years of slow-motion disaster. Brianna's business consumed more of her time and soul. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she'd say when I complained about missing another baseball game. "This business supports our lifestyle." By the time Dustin graduated high school, he'd become a stranger. When I suggested he consider trade school, he looked at me like I'd suggested he become a medieval serf. "Dad, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding you back," he said, already talking like a business consultant. "You settled for mediocrity. I won't make that mistake." Settled for mediocrity. As if 25 years of keeping the lights on for our community meant nothing. College made everything worse. Dustin chose business school and came home full of theories about personal optimization. "You could do more, Dad," he'd say, as if my contentment was a personal failing. "Mom started with nothing and built an empire. You've had the same job for 20 years. Some things matter more than money," I'd reply, but he'd already stopped listening. The final explosion came during his senior year. Brianna had been working 100-hour weeks. I'd been handling everything at home. When she missed Dustin's graduation because of a client crisis, I finally said what had been building for years. "This is enough, Brianna. Family has to come first sometimes." She stood in our kitchen, that crystal and granite shrine to success. "Don't you dare lecture me about priorities. Everything we have, everything Dustin's accomplished exists because of my work." "What about everything we've lost?" "Like what?" She finally looked up from her phone, genuinely puzzled. "Like us, like being a family instead of a corporation. Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is working," she said quietly. The divorce took 6 months. Brianna's lawyers were efficient, professional, devastating. I got the house on Maple Street and enough money to live modestly. She got everything else, including Dustin's unquestioned loyalty. "You're holding him back, too," Dustin told me during one of our last conversations. "All this guilt about family values and simple living. It's toxic, Dad. I can't be around that negativity anymore." I sat alone in my empty house afterward. Now, 15 years later, I had no idea why she'd remembered my name in her will. Friday morning arrived, gray and cold. The drive to Riverside Memorial Chapel took me through neighborhoods that told the story of Rock Springs' economic divide. I parked my 15-year-old Honda between a Lexus and a Cadillac, feeling like an intruder. At least 200 people filled the space. I slipped into a back pew, but whispers followed my arrival. Her ex-husband. Can you believe after what he put her through? "Dad," the voice cut through the chapel's murmur like a blade. I looked up to see Dustin striding down the aisle, his face a mask of disbelief and barely controlled anger. "What are you doing here?" "I came to pay my respects." "You lost the right to do that 15 years ago," he said, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "She wouldn't want you here." "Maybe not, but I needed to be here." "You leave now." His voice rose. "You embarrassed her enough when she was alive. Don't compound it by pretending to grieve her death." I remained standing. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Dustin. I'll sit in the back." Before I could respond, Dustin turned to address the gathered mourners. "I apologize for this disruption. My father seems to have forgotten that divorce means you're no longer family." He gestured toward me. "This is Jerry Flores, the man who spent 22 years holding back one of the most brilliant women this town has ever produced." "Dustin, that's enough." The words came out harder than I intended. "Is it? I think these people deserve to understand why you're really here. He took half her assets in the divorce despite contributing nothing to her success. And now that she's gone, he shows up expecting sympathy." Each word landed like a physical blow, reducing 22 years of marriage to a simple story of failure and blame. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. "I loved your mother for 40 years, I said, my voice carrying clearly. 22 of them as her husband, 18 more as someone who wished her well. I'm not here to make claims or demand recognition. I'm here because once upon a time we made promises to each other that mattered, and I choose to honor that memory. I sat back down. Dustin shot me one final look of contempt before striding toward the front pew. I waited until the chapel had mostly emptied before standing to leave. Mr. Flores. A man in an expensive suit approached. Dan Morrison from Morrison, Welsh and Associates. Could I have a word? He introduced himself again. I'm sorry for your loss. I wonder if I might have a word with you and Dustin. There are some matters we need to discuss regarding Mrs. Flores's estate. Before I could respond, Dustin appeared. Dan, finally. I was wondering when we'd handle the business side of things. I'd like both of you to come to my office for the reading of your mother's will. Both of us. Dustin's eyebrows rose. Is that necessary? I mean, he's not. Your father is specifically named in the will, Dustin. His presence is required by law. I felt a flutter of surprise. I don't think that's necessary, I said quietly. I'm sure it's just a formality. You don't need me there. I'm afraid I do, Mr. Flores. Mrs. Flores was very specific about who should be present for the reading. Both you and Dustin must be there. Dustin shrugged with casual confidence. Fine, let's get this over with. He turned to me with barely concealed impatience. Try not to make this more difficult than it needs to be. The walk to Dan's office, on the top floor of a restored Victorian house, was quiet and tense. Certificates and diplomas lined the walls, interrupted by photographs of Dan with various local dignitaries and business leaders. It was exactly the kind of place Brianna would have chosen. Please have a seat. Dan gestured toward two leather chairs positioned in front of his mahogany desk. Dustin claimed the chair closest to Dan, leaving me the one slightly to the side. Before we begin, Dan said, adjusting his glasses, I want to express my condolences again. Brianna was not only a valued client, but someone I considered a friend. Her loss is deeply felt by everyone who knew her. Dustin nodded solemnly. I remained silent. Dan lifted the top document, several pages bound with a blue backing, and cleared his throat. This is the last will and testament of Brianna Elizabeth Flores, executed on March 15th, 2024, and properly witnessed according to Wyoming state law. The will supersedes all previous wills and codicils. The will confirms that Mrs. Flores was of sound mind and disposing memory when these documents were prepared, and that she was under no undue influence or coercion. Dan's voice carried the formal cadence of legal proceedings. Dustin leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together, a man preparing to claim his inheritance. I hereby make the following specific bequests and devises, he read, his voice steady and clear. To my beloved son, Dustin Michael Flores, I leave the family home at 847 Hillcrest Avenue, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein. Dustin smiled, a satisfied expression spreading across his face. Additionally, Dan continued, I bequeath to Dustin the sum of $500,000 to be transferred from my primary investment account within 60 days of probate. $500,000 plus the house. I watched Dustin's reaction, noting how his smile flickered slightly around the edges. That's wonderful, of course, Dustin said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. But what about Mom's business interests? The company. Dan set down the first page and lifted the second, his expression remaining professionally neutral. I'm continuing with the specific bequests, Dustin. Please allow me to finish reading the relevant sections. The bequest to Dustin, Dan continued, includes the following conditions. The inheritance is contingent upon his continued employment with Flores Consulting Solutions for a minimum of 2 years following the date of this will's execution, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved. Now Dustin looked genuinely confused. Conditions? What kind of conditions? And what do you mean until the company is sold? Who would sell it? I'm reading the will as written, Dustin. These are your mother's words, not mine. Let me understand this clearly, Dustin said, his voice taking on an edge. I get the house and $500,000, but there are strings attached. And you're talking about the company being sold? That doesn't make sense. Mom would never sell the company. It was her life's work. Dan removed his glasses and cleaned them carefully. Your mother's will contain additional provisions that address the disposition of her remaining assets, he said quietly. The company, her investment portfolio, and several other significant holdings. Well, then let's hear them, Dustin demanded. What are these other provisions? Before I continue, Dan said, settling back in his chair, I want to emphasize that these documents represent Mrs. Flores's final considered wishes. They were prepared after extensive discussion and consultation, and she was adamant about their contents. Dan lifted the third page of the will. However, he said, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach tighten, the will contains provisions for the disposition of Mrs. Flores's remaining assets, which constitute the majority of her estate. Dan lifted his reading glasses and looked directly at me for the first time. However, he continued, the will contains provisions for the disposition of Mrs. Flores's remaining assets, which constitute the majority of her estate. Dustin leaned forward even further. Finally, let's hear about the company and the rest of her investments. Dan returned his attention to the document. To my former husband, Jerry Michael Flores, he read, his words falling into the quiet office like stones into still water. I bequeath the sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I felt my mouth fall open. There must be some mistake, I managed to say. Did you say 33 million? 33.5 million? Yes. Dan's tone remained professionally neutral. Dustin's face had gone completely white, then flushed red. What did you just say? Additionally, Dan continued reading, I transferred to Jerry Flores, controlling interest in Flores Consulting Solutions, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and business assets. This transfer includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities, an appointment as chairman of the board of directors. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt sideways. This can't be right. My voice came out as barely a whisper. There has to be some error in the documentation. I assure you, Mr. Flores, there's no error. Dan removed his glasses again. These documents were prepared under Mrs. Flores's direct supervision. Dustin shot to his feet, so abruptly his chair rolled backward and struck the wall. This is impossible. She wouldn't. She couldn't. He turned to stare at me. What did you do? How did you manipulate her? I didn't do anything, I said weakly. I haven't spoken to your mother in 15 years. The word exploded from Dustin like a gunshot. Liar. People don't just give away $33 million to their ex-husbands for no reason. You must have gotten to her somehow. Dan's voice cut through Dustin's rising hysteria. I can assure you that Mrs. Flores was of completely sound mind when she executed these documents. She underwent a thorough mental competency evaluation, specifically to prevent any future challenges to the will's validity. But why? I asked, the question emerging from deep confusion. Why would she do this? Dan gathered the will documents. Mrs. Flores left specific instructions regarding that question, Mr. Flores. She asked me to share a personal message with you after reading these provisions. Dustin's face contorted with rage and betrayal. A personal message? She left him a personal message, but cut me out of everything that mattered. You received a substantial inheritance, Dustin, Dan replied calmly. $500,000 and a valuable property represent more wealth than most people see in their lifetimes. Compared to what he's getting. Dustin pointed at me with a shaking finger. You're talking about hundreds of millions in total assets. The company alone is worth more than everything else combined. This is fraud, he screamed, his voice cracking. Criminal fraud. She was manipulated, coerced, mentally compromised. He whirled toward me. You did something to her. There's no other explanation. Dustin, I swear to you, I had no contact with your mother. I didn't even know she was sick. Liar. He slammed his palm against Dan's desk. Nobody gives away everything they've built to someone who abandoned their family. Someone who couldn't even be bothered to call when she was dying. She didn't abandon anyone, I said quietly, finding some small reserve of strength. Our marriage ended, but that doesn't mean. It means exactly that. Dustin's voice rose to a near shriek. You walked away from us. You took your pathetic settlement and disappeared into your pathetic little life while she built an empire. And now you want me to believe she just decided to hand it all over to you. Dan's voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Flores, Dustin, I understand this is difficult news, but I must insist you control yourself. These are your mother's clearly stated wishes, executed with full legal authority. Dustin spun toward the lawyer. I want every document examined. I want psychiatric evaluations. I want to know every single contact this man had with my mother in the past 5 years. There were no contacts, Dan replied calmly. Mrs. Flores made that very clear when she explained her decision. Explained her decision? Dustin's laugh was bitter. So, she did explain why she decided to betray her only son and give everything to the man who ruined her first marriage. She left a personal message for your father. Yes, the word father seemed to hit Dustin like a physical blow. For just a moment his rage flickered, and something else showed through. A pain so deep it made my chest ache. Then the fury returned, doubled in intensity. He's not my father, Dustin snarled. My father would have been there when she needed him. My father would have supported her dreams instead of trying to drag her down. He turned back to me, his face contorted with years of accumulated resentment. You're nothing but a failed man who couldn't handle being married to someone better than you. I had felt inadequate during those final years. I had struggled with Brianna's success. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe I wasn't the husband she deserved, but I never asked for this. I never expected this. Expected. Dustin's voice climbed another octave. You orchestrated this. Somehow. Some way you got to her when she was vulnerable, when she was sick or scared, or... That's enough, Dan interrupted, his professional patience finally showing strain. Mrs. Flores was neither sick nor vulnerable when she made these decisions. She was, in fact, more determined and clear-minded than I had ever seen her. Then why? Dustin demanded, his voice breaking slightly. Why would she do this to me? I was everything she wanted me to be. I worked for her company. I lived the life she planned for me. I became the son she could be proud of. She left a message explaining her reasoning. Dan said gently, Would you like me to read it? Dustin's hands were shaking now. A message. She couldn't explain it to my face, but she left a message for him. The message addresses both of you, actually. It was meant to be shared after the will reading. Dan clarified. Maybe we should hear what she had to say, I said, though my voice came out hoarse and uncertain. Dan opened the manila envelope, extracting several pages of cream-colored stationery. My dearest Jerry, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably sitting in Dan's office, wondering if the entire world has lost its mind. I felt my lips curve into the ghost of a smile. I know this inheritance comes as a shock. I know you're probably thinking there's been some terrible mistake, that you don't deserve this money or this responsibility. But Jerry, you're wrong. You deserve every penny, and I'm going to tell you why. Dan paused, then continued. I never stopped loving you. Not during our worst fights. Not during the divorce proceedings. Not during these 15 years of stubborn silence. I was angry with you for not understanding my ambitions, but I was angrier with myself for choosing those ambitions over our marriage. You tried to save us, Jerry. You begged me to find balance. I was too proud and too afraid to listen. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt tears starting, hot and unexpected. Dustin, the message continued, and my son's head snapped up. My beautiful, brilliant boy, I know you're furious right now. But sweetheart, you're not ready for this inheritance. Not yet. You've lived your entire adult life in the shadow of my success, accepting the benefits without understanding the responsibility. More importantly, you've spent 15 years hating a good man for crimes he never committed. That's not true, Dustin whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Jerry taught me about character, about integrity, about the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself through cruelty or judgment. I never forgot the man who taught them to me. I was crying openly now. Dustin, you have received enough to live comfortably and explore who you might become without the weight of unlimited wealth. Learn to build something yourself. Learn to value people over profit. Learn to forgive your father for the crime of being human and imperfect. Dustin made a sound like a wounded animal. Jerry, you're inheriting more than money. You're inheriting the chance to do what I should have done, to use wealth as a tool for good rather than a weapon for proving superiority. I trust you because you never wanted this, because you'll never use it to hurt people the way I sometimes did. When Dan finished reading, the office fell into profound silence. I held her letter against my chest, feeling the restoration of my worth. Dustin was the first to speak. This isn't over. I can contest this. Mental incapacity, undue influence, fraud. They're ways to challenge a will. You could try, I said gently. But your mother was right, Dustin. You're not ready for this responsibility. And you are. His laugh was bitter, hollow. You're a nobody, Dad. A retired power plant worker with no business experience. Maybe you're right, I said, standing up slowly. Maybe I don't know anything about running a business empire, but I know something your mother valued more than business expertise. What's that? I know the difference between serving others and serving myself. This is insane. She was sick. She was old. She wasn't thinking clearly. Your mother was 62 years old and in perfect mental health when she executed these documents. Dan interjected. Then why? Dustin's voice cracked. Why would she do this to me? She didn't do it to you, Dustin. She did it for you. She gave you a chance to discover who you are when you're not living in the shadow of unlimited wealth. I don't want that chance. The words exploded from him. I want what's rightfully mine. What's rightfully yours, I said quietly, is $500,000 and a house worth nearly $1 million. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. What you think you deserved was never really yours to begin with. You think you've won, he said, gathering his coat with shaking hands. You think this makes you some kind of hero. No, I replied. I think it makes me responsible. He stood at the office door for a moment. This isn't finished. Yes, it is, I said gently. This finished the moment your mother made her choice. The only question now is what you do with the life she's given you. He left without another word. Dan, can I ask you something? Did she really love me, even after everything that went wrong between us? He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen all day. Jerry, she talked about you every time we met. Not about the divorce, not about the problems, about the man who taught her that success without character is just expensive failure. I walked out of that office a different man. Justice, I realized, wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about recognition. The recognition that character matters more than credentials. Brianna had seen all of that, and in her final act, she had given me the chance to prove her right. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right. Thank you for watching.